Hello, my name is Rinon, and today we are not going to be talking about FF14 gameplay. We're actually going to be talking about what you can do to prepare for raid in Final Fantasy XIV, because I'm pretty sure we've all met two types of gamers in FF14, especially if you're going to go into Party Finder when you're trying to progress Savage raids, or if you're even trying to do an EX Primal. The first is the classic guy. He comes in with no gear. He can't do his opener, he doesn't know what buttons to press, he messes up the first mechanic, he kills everybody and then he rage quits. And let's be honest, we all fucking hate that guy. We don't want to be him. The other type of player is the one that you want to be. It's somebody who's prepared for raid, they're decently geared, and you understand what you're getting into and what you're doing with your class when you're in there. So today I'm going to chat with you about a couple of things that you can do to prepare for raiding, regardless of your experience level, as well as a couple of things that more hardcore groups might want to look into in preparation for their next prog, because there are a couple of things that I see many groups don't use that they should really consider. And just as a note, if you fancy subscribing to the channel, I'm going to be posting videos every Wednesday and every Sunday, so I'd absolutely love it if you subscribe. Okay, so let's get into it. The first one is an obvious one. It's to make sure that you stock up on your consumables. You have to make sure that your consumables are stocked and ready to go when you go into raid. And when I'm talking about consumables, in this case, I mean food and pots. I think it's a fair expectation that if you're going into a Savage fight, or you're going into an Ultimate fight, or if you're going into an Extreme Primal fight when it's only just released, you should be using raid food every single pull. In the current tier, I think the most commonly used food that you should keep a stack of is maybe the stuffed Highland cabbage. It's pretty nice for general use, but I think that also if you're trying to hit specific skill speed tiers, which some best in slot lists require, and some classes really prefer specific skill speeds, you can go for sausage and sauerkraut for physical classes, and for magic classes you can use herring pie. I know that as a healer I use a mixture of herring pie and stuffed Highland cabbage depending on the piece of content I'm doing. You can check out a list of useful BIS for your class on the Balanced Discord server, and honestly those resources are available online in a few places as well. They're generally quite a good basis for your gear that you want to aim for, the food you want to use, the melds you want to use. I am however going to cover BIS lists and how to tweak your BIS based on the content that you're doing in a future video, so if you want to wait for that, you can also do that. Potions give you a main stat buff for 30 seconds, which directly translates into increased damage during that period of time. If you're progging on Savage or Ultimate, you should be popping them on pulls where you're expecting to go for the clear, or alternatively, when you're close to the end of a phase and you don't really know what the DPS check is for that phase, you just want to pop them to push the damage as much as possible. Healers should also be stocking up on super ethers, absolutely. I wouldn't really expect people to be popping potions every single pull unless you're in an extremely hardcore setting, but they're still very useful to have to make sure that you can meet the DPS requirements of a fight. You can get hold of most consumables pretty easily on the market board for a decent price, or alternatively you can level and gear your Culinarian and Alchemist and macro craft them. If you don't want to do either, just find a crafter friend and beg profusely like I do. The second point is to know your job, and more importantly know your role to a decent degree. Please, please, please do not be that guy who goes into raid without knowing the basics of his class. It makes everyone else's jobs harder, and honestly, you're not likely to make too many friends if you're not pulling your weight. Take some time aside, try to hit a training dummy for a couple of hours, do your best to ensure that you're extremely comfortable with your opener and your rotation before you go into any endgame duties on that class. To be honest, your goal should be to be able to do your rotation without looking at your hotbars, without mistakes, consistently, for a long period of time as well. I'm not talking just an opener for 30 seconds, I mean like 5-10 minutes. There's going to be one major plus from doing this that you're going to get in raid, and you'll see the fruits of your labour come quite quickly as well. When you get into raid, you don't have to think about your rotation, and instead you can focus 100% of your brain power on doing mechanics. It's not really essential to be a flawless, incredible player at your class and innately know every possible optimization, but understanding how to make the most of your rotation and play decently and consistently every single pull is key to being a good player. The next point is to make sure that you meld your gear. I hate it when I go into a party finder, say you're doing a weekly Savage clear, you jump in and you see that some of the players are just sat there with unmelded gear, because it makes it really clear that they're not putting effort in, they're not trying their best, they're not trying to get the most out of their class and their gear. They're just there for the ride. Honestly, even if you're tight on gil, It's extremely cheap to afford a set of materia. You can get materia 6, you can get materia 7, or you can go the whole hog and get materia 8. They're very easily accessible from hunts, they're very cheap on the market board, and to be honest, there's no reason not to. Every little helps, and you definitely don't want to be actively taking damage away from your group because it saves you a couple of thousand gil. You can remove those materia with a relatively high success rate as well and put them into new pieces of gear as you upgrade, so honestly, there's very little loss to doing it. One thing to note is that crafted gear, which in this tier's case is I-480, can be overmelded to a maximum of 5 materia slots, but I would argue it isn't really worth doing if you aren't progressing in the first few weeks of a raid tier. Just use those guaranteed materia meld slots and you'll be absolutely fine. Similarly to best in slot lists, you're also going to find melding priorities for your classes in community resources such as the balance, and they're very useful and I would recommend that you take a look at them. The next one is to do your research. If you're not jumping into a raid on release day, that almost certainly means that there's going to be guides available for the content, both in written form and video guides. There are a lot of people that do excellent video guides for content and have been doing for a long time. Unless you're joining a group that explicitly lists blind progression, or that you aren't expected to know the mechanics of the fight, it's expected of you that you should at least watch a guide quickly to get a rough understanding of the mechanics of the fight. Mistakes are fine in a progression setting, but players try to make the most efficient use of their time possible, so they want players that have already done their research in advance. They do not want a deadweight. While it's fine to be a player who wants to discover these fights on your own blind, because to be honest I'm one of those players, I think it's by far the most fun way to work through content in Final Fantasy XIV, you can't expect to go into a party finder and expect the 7 other random players to slow their own progression on your account. What you should instead do is find a pre-made or build a group so that you can experience the fight the way that you want to. I do think that honestly these are the essentials for a new player that wants to jump into raiding. Make sure you've got your food and pot set, make sure you've got the best gear available to you and that you're using it, you're melding it, you're practiced at your class, you know your rotation, you're comfortable on that class, and you've done your research. But if you're trying to get into a more hardcore raid progression setting, these are a couple of tips that I've learned from my experiences hardcore progging that really made things easier for the group. The first one is to understand that there's going to be a good chance of balance changes taking place in the lead up to new content. There's absolutely a good chance that your favourite class could quickly see itself at a massive disadvantage compared to other ones. As a result, I always advise that people try to see themselves more as a role player than a specific job player. They can flex on demand and they can play at least a couple of jobs in their role. As an example, I'm a healer main. I don't main white mage, I don't main scholar, I don't main astro. I play all of them, and whichever one is going to benefit my group the most is the one that I'll be on. The next thing is to make sure that your in real life obligations are sorted. If you're going to take time away from life for a day, 2 days, a week, whatever it's going to be to dedicate to hardcore progression, you need to make sure that all of your commitments and needs are met in advance. Prepare some food you can easily reheat, book time off work, make sure all your chores are done, tidy your apartment, and get some rest the night before. If you do all of that, that means that when the content goes live and the servers go up, you're ready to go and you don't need to think about anything else. The next one is to work together with your group to try to put together a general plan on how you're going to deal with recurring mechanics in fights. Final Fantasy XIV has really predictable fight design. We all know that 90% of fights start with a tank buster into raid damage or a raid damage into tank buster. And we can expect mechanics like Protean Wave to pop up in basically every fight in the game. Chariot and Dynamo with a different name, 5 times a tier. These mechanics come back again and again. As a result, you want to make it a goal for your group to have a plan to handle these recurring mechanics before they even happen. Before you go into progression, make sure that you know your Protean Wave spots already. Make sure that you know what you're going to do for X mechanic or Y mechanic should they pop up, and then you can deal with them maybe immediately and not waste pulls. I think that this is very important and can honestly save progression groups so much time from having to talk in between pulls or wiping to something that they've already seen in previous content. On top of this, one thing that I would recommend is that you have a way to record your gameplay, and more so than that, to be able to share your screen with your teammates. This is so incredibly powerful for figuring out strats, because you can quickly show everyone your point of view, and you can show everyone what happened to you, what went wrong, what you think is the correct solution, and it's so much faster than trying to use things like markers on the arena or just trying to explain. Because you could use something like a pen tool, you could bring up your screen, show off your point of view, and you could explain visually how you intend to solve the mechanic and how things went wrong for you. and I think it's much faster. It takes seconds instead of minutes, and this is what you want in prog. You want as little time as possible talking, as much time as possible getting deeper and deeper into phases. One last point that I think hardcore players should definitely bear in mind on top of this is to make sure that they have a way to obtain crafted gear immediately. Usually this is going to involve working alongside a crafter or a team of crafters and paying them a certain amount of money for them to provide you with gear. You're going to need to figure out who's going to do that for you. If the answer is nobody, then are you going to do it yourself? In which case you're going to have to take time out of raiding to do that. These are all discussions that you and your group are going to need to have, and you want to have them early as well. So just to summarise quickly, the tips that I think that hardcore players should bear in mind are to make sure that they prepare their in real life requirements, make sure that everything is sorted in advance. They make sure that they can play multiple jobs in their role and flex accordingly. They put together a general plan as a group how they're going to deal with recurring mechanics that appear in FF14 a lot. And finally, make sure that they're recording their gameplay either via private stream or just saving it to their hard drive, and then they have a way to share screens and show their team what's going on visually. So yeah, I hope some of these prep tips helped you at least a little bit. I would say if you're nervous about getting into raiding in this game, just follow these tips, hop into Party Finder and try not to feel the pressure, honestly. Raiding can be so much fun and it's very rewarding, and I think it's definitely worth at least experiencing once. If you don't like it, that's fine, but maybe you find a new hobby. So expect my next video next Wednesday. In the meantime, I'd love it if you followed me on twitch.tv. I stream FF14 healer POVs pretty damn regularly. My Twitch is in the description, so thank you very much for watching and have an absolutely wonderful day.